Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So today we're going to discuss a little bit more the question of gravity. That was some of your homework. So we're going to look at some things in the Bhagavad Gita where Prabhupada talks about gravity, and then in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, he also talks some things about gravity. 640. Okay, so first of all, I read Shresta's explanation. What is the scientist's definition of gravity? And why are we going to spend a little time on this? Because the scientists claim that gravity explains how matter has the ability to organize itself. And Shrestha says in her homework that scientists use the concept of gravity to explain that matter has the ability to organize itself, but actually that's not a fact. The scientists use this to deny the existence of God and to reinforce the Big Bang theory, but in actuality, matter can only become organized and transform when there is an intelligence and a consciousness behind it. All these planets in the universe are not orbiting due to gravitational orbits, but due to the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, whoever did their homework to explain the scientist's definition of gravity, and that definition doesn't make sense. It's not really a clear understanding of what gravity is. So, what is the Bhagavad Gita saying about gravity and why, like planets stay in their orbits that are specific, and when you jump up in the air, you come back down again to the earth. Okay. So if we look at the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, verse number 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, so we're going to read this and have a clearer understanding of what is the force of gravity. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, starting from verse 6. So, it says, verse number 6, understand that as the mighty wind blowing everywhere rests always in the sky, all created beings rest in me. And then the purport, Prabhupada says, for the ordinary person it is almost inconceivable how the huge material creation is resting in him, meaning in Krishna. But the Lord is giving an example which may help us to understand. The sky may be the biggest manifestation we can conceive. And in that sky, the wind, or air, is the biggest manifestation in a cosmic world. The movement of the air influences the movements of everything. But although the wind is great, it is still situated within the sky. The wind is not beyond the sky. Similarly, all the wonderful cosmic manifestations are existing by the supreme will of God, and all of them are subordinate to that supreme will. As we generally say, not a blade of grass moves without the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus, everything is moving under His will. By His will, everything is being created, everything is being maintained, and everything is being annihilated. Still, He is aloof from everything, as the sky is always aloof from the activities of the wind. In the Upanishads, it is said, Yad Bisha Vata Pavate. It is out of the fear of the Supreme Lord that the wind is blowing. Taittiriya Upanishad 2.8.1. In Brihad Aranyakya Upanishad 3.8.9, it is stated, by the supreme order, under the superintendence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the moon, the sun, and the other great planets are moving. In the Brahma Samhita 5.52, also it is stated, this is the description of the movement of the sun. It is said that the sun is considered to be one of the eyes of the Supreme Lord, and that it has immense potency to diffuse heat and light. Still, it is moving in its prescribed order by the orbit, by the order and the supreme will of Govinda. So, from the Vedic literature, we can find evidence that this material manifestation, which appears to us to be very wonderful and great, is under the complete control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This will be further explained in the later verses of this chapter. Okay, now what can we garner, or what can we understand from this purport? Well, we always should begin with the concept that to understand something we don't know, we begin by trying to understand something that we do know and see if it's comparable to something we don't know. Like, for example, let's take the example of the Amazon company, or it could be the Microsoft company, or it could be Facebook company, any one of those companies. And let's see how things get moving in those companies. Well, each one of those companies has a CEO, a Chief Operating Officer, a Chief Executive Officer, right? And that person has the final say. So how do they get things moving in that in a company like, let's say, Amazon? Well, you have the head guy, let's call it Jeff Bezos, and he has an idea. He started his company in his house garage in Seattle, and he started selling books, used books, new books, in his garage. Is that right? Yeah. So he had an idea, and now he, as an intelligent person, purchased some books, and then he put those books on the internet and set up a way that people can pay for them with, PayPal or Visa cards or whatever, MasterCard, Visa card. So he had to set all that up, right? And there are programs for it that he had to make so that people can see the book. There's a description of the book, and then they can read a little bit of the book, All this is on the web page, and then they want to order it. So then there's a way they order it, and then they pay for it with the credit card, and then Jeff Bezos gets the money, and now he executes the order, meaning he wraps up the book and sends it through the United States mail to the customer. Now, the United States mail, that's another thing that has a CEO and has a lot of workers and a lot of managers, and has different types of vehicles for delivering packages like airplanes and trucks and workers. So Jeff Bezos is not personally delivering each book. He's working with the post office, so he has to pay the post office, and then the post office has a whole organization for delivering packages. So it all began with an idea, and then he had to organize the materials. So there was books, and there were boxes, and there's stamps, and there is tape to close the box, and there's some bubble wrap to hold the book in place in the box. All these things, you see, and it's all intelligence driven by Jeff Bezos. And then he takes it to the takes the book to the post office. It's properly boxed, and he has a proper stamp on it, and he hands it to the post office, and then they hand it off to their delivery trucks or airplane, and it is delivered eventually to the owner. It's a whole organization. Now, there are airplanes involved, there's cars involved, there's gasoline involved, there are warehouses. So now, Jeff Bezos doesn't own all those things, but he's paying the post office, which has all those things, and it's eventually delivered to the person that ordered it. And Jeff Bezos he started with himself and his wife, but eventually he started hiring workers and IT people to make bigger and bigger programs to handle the bigger volume of sales and so forth. And then he diversified into other products, cookbooks and science books and textbooks and fiction books and nonfiction books and all kinds of books, right? And then he made partnerships or business arrangements with book publishers, and also he started adding other products, right? And then there are so many manufacturers in the United States, so he made deals with each one of those different manufacturers to be able to sell their products also. In two ways. Either he would buy the product and store it in a warehouse. Now he couldn't do that out of his house garage, so he had to rent a warehouse. Now, a warehouse, it's another company that has a CEO and has an idea, and they buy buildings and they make them into warehouses, and then they rent them out. So you see, every time you have another company, you have another CEO and another idea. So, the post office is one important part of Jeff Bezos' distribution method. Then renting buildings like factory buildings and office buildings, and working with trucking companies, and then working with airline companies, and so forth. So you see, it keeps getting bigger and bigger, but each time there are more people involved and they're all intelligent, and they're all doing things in very specific ways, right? And that's something we know, right? There are many companies in the United States, and they're all functioning the same way. Well, now let's look at the universe. is there a difference between, let's say, an airplane that's made by Boeing and is purchased by, let's say, Delta Airlines, and the airplane is driven by air pilots and there's stewardesses and stewards, and it has to fly in a specific way. Let's say it's going to Europe from New York City, so it has to fly over the Atlantic Ocean, and it has to get permission from the Federal Aviation Commission in order to use an airport. I mean, the airports don't belong to the companies. They belong to sometimes the government, sometimes to the state governments, and so forth. And they have to get all these different permissions to fly out of, let's say, New York airport, and then fly in certain orbit or certain, let's say, certain way across the ocean at a certain height or altitude, and they have to be monitored by government agencies, and they have to have their own communication system with the airplane and the pilots, and there's so many things involved, to move that airplane with passengers from New York to, let's say, London. And then they have to have permission from the British government and to land in the airport, Heathrow Airport in London, and their airport officials, and then there's people in the giving them permission to land at a specific time. So you see, there's a whole huge organization and cooperation between different companies, different governments, and so forth. So, is there a difference between an airplane that's flying in a specific trajectory from New York to London and, let's say, a planet like the Earth that's rotating in a certain orbit around the sun? No, there isn't. Both are specific, let's say, bodies that are moving through the air. So now let's see what Prabhupada says here. He says, the movement of the air influences the movements of everything. Well, how is the airplane flying? The airplane engineers, they figured out from the laws of aerodynamics how a bird flies. So it's by the movements of the air. So the airplane has, propellers, or it has a jet engine, and when the engine starts moving, there's things that are turning inside the jet engine or the propeller of a propeller-driven airplane, and it creates air that moves underneath and above the wings of the airplane. And when the air that was one of our homeworks, to study the principles of aerodynamics. So when the air going over the wing is faster than the air underneath the wing, if I'm not mistaken, the airplane starts going up. And then they balance the air, and the airplane can stay in a steady, straight, more or less straight trajectory once it gets up at a certain height. And if they have to go up higher, then again, they increase the flow of the air in certain ways that the airplane goes up, and if they want to decrease it, the airplane will come down. So we see where Prabhupada says, but although the wind is great, it is still situated with, and it says, And in the sky, the wind or the air is the biggest manifestation of the cosmic world. The movement of the air influences the movements of everything. But although the wind is great, it is still situated within the sky. The wind is not beyond the sky. Similarly, all the wonderful cosmic manifestations are existing by the supreme will of the God, and all of them are subordinate to the supreme will. As we generally say, not a blade of grass moves without the will of the Supreme Personality Godhead. So they figured out how the engines of the airplane can adjust the movement of the air above and below the wings. And because of that, anytime the pilot increases or decreases the airflows, the airplane will go up or it will come down. You see? So Krishna is doing the same thing. He's controlling the wind. So therefore it says, in the Upanishads it is said, Yad Bisha Vata Pavate. It is out of the fear of the Supreme Lord that the wind is blowing. Taittiriya Upanishad 2.8.1. In the Brihad Aranyakya Upanishad 3.8.9 it is stated, by the supreme order, under the superintendence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the moon, the sun, and the other great planets are moving. In Brahma Samhita also it is stated about this movement of the sun. It is said that the sun is considered to be one of the eyes of the Supreme Lord, and that it has immense potency to diffuse heat and light. Since it is moving in its prescribed orbit by the order and the supreme will of Govinda, so from the Vedic literature we can find evidence that this material manifestation, which appears to us to be very wonderful and great, is under the complete control of the Supreme Personality Godhead. So that's the point. Amazon is under the complete control of Jeff Bezos, and Microsoft is under the complete control of Satya Nadella right now. And then Facebook is under complete control of Zuckerberg, and so forth. So there is a conscious person who is the controller. And there are many specific systems and operations that are taking place with subordinate intelligent persons directing them. So on every planet, there is a supreme ruler. Like the sun, the supreme ruler is Vivaswan. And he is in charge. He's like the pilot of the sun. And he's keeping the sun in a specific orbit with the help of Krishna, who's organizing the wind in space. Now, scientists might say, wait a minute, there's no wind in space. There's only wind on the earth. Well, that's not true. But there's a different type of wind in space. There are electromagnetic waves in space coming from the sun. And they're moving with heat, and they're acting like a wind. And if you, it's almost like the currents of the ocean and a river. If you get connected to that current, then it'll carry you. So there are many similarities between the way an airplane flies and how an orbit is, how in an orbit or in a specific trajectory, and how planets are kept in specific orbits. And there's very little deviation from those orbits. See? It's because you have intelligent people driving things, and it's all done by manipulation of air. So so scientists will argue there's no air in space, but there are electromagnetic types of waves that act like the air. Let's see about that now. Wind in space. Let's see what it says. More than 20 years ago, researchers proposed the existence of a space wind, a steady flow of charged particles inside the Earth's magnetosphere, the region of space governed by our magnetic field. Due to the wind, the plasma sphere loses up to 90 tons of material every day. So anyway, space wind really does exist. Popular science. Okay. So you can look it up. This is one of your homeworks. Find out about what the space wind is. Is there any wind in outer space? Is there wind in space? NASA. How fast is solar wind? Why is there no air in space? What is solar wind? The definition, cause, and effects explained. So look these topics up, and you'll see that there is a type of wind in space. And it is being manipulated by Krishna and his designated subordinates called the demigods. Just like there is a CEO of Amazon, and by the way, Jeff Bezos now does have his own airplanes for delivery, and he designates vice presidents and other directors, and they take orders from him and get things done, like flying the Amazon planes. You see the Amazon Prime trucks all over Seattle now, and so forth. And all these things are being done by the order of Bezos and his subordinate directors. In the same way, Krishna is controlling everything in the universe through the demigods. And everything is intelligence-driven. That's why the planets stay in specific orbits. And that's why the sun is also moving in a specific orbit. And all these movements are in sync. They're all coordinated and acting perfectly. Okay, so now we go to the next verse, chapter 9, verse number 7. O son of Kunti, at the end of the millennium, all material manifestations enter into my nature. And at the beginning of another millennium, by my potency, I create them again. So Krishna is clearly explaining that he's the controller. He is controlling all these things that we see. Creation and annihilation and maintenance during the creation. So Prabhupada says, the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of this material cosmic manifestation are completely dependent on the supreme will of the personality of Godhead. Just like if Jeff Bezos says, okay, I'm going to liquidate my company Amazon. Just like he said, I'm going to create a company called Amazon. And then he said, I'm going to maintain the company named Amazon. And then he says, I'm going to liquidate the company named Amazon. You see? So, therefore, there's creation, maintenance, and annihilation. Krishna is organizing that, and Jeff Bezos is organizing it. So, if we start with the known to understand the unknown, then we see everything Jeff Bezos is doing is basically copying what's already being done by Krishna. And he's managing his big organization through directors that work under him or subordinate to him. And they're all intelligent people. It's not that there's no intelligence involved, right? There's no consciousness involved. Obviously, there's consciousness and intelligence involved. And so if it's involved in a little company like Amazon on a little earth, why would you assume that it's not the same thing in the whole universe? And you can compare the airplanes and the trucks delivering Amazon goods to the planets. And in each planet there's a driver. You know, Vivaswan, Chandra, and Varuna, and so forth. And each planet has its driver, and each force has its driver. You know. So the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of this material cosmic manifestation are completely dependent on the supreme will of the personality of Godhead. At the end of the millennium means at the death of Brahma. Brahma lives for 100 years, and his one day is calculated as 4,300,000,000 of our earthly years. His night is of the same duration. His month consists of 30 such days and nights, and his year of 12 months. After 100 such years, when Brahma dies, the devastation or annihilation takes place. This means that the energy manifested by the Supreme Lord is again wound up in himself. So the energy by which Bezos created Amazon eventually will be wound up in himself, and he'll end up back in his home, in the garage, or he'll even eliminate the garage, and he won't be involved in business anymore. He'll just be living like he did when he began. So Krishna can expand and retract his energy, right? Then again, when there is a need to manifest the cosmic world, it is done by his will. Bahusham. Although I am one, I shall become many. So he started his company, Bezos started his company, just himself, and then his wife. And then he started hiring other people more and more. So like Krishna, he starts with himself only and his energy, and now he expands it. And everything is personal. There's nothing impersonal. There's Balaram, there's the first chapter of Vyuha, there's Narayana, there's the second chapter of Vyuha, then there's Vishnu incarnations, and then there's Brahma, and then demigods, and sages, and Prajapatis, and so forth. And it just keeps expanding like that. And then it's wound up again. So this is the Vedic aphorism, Chandogya Upanishad 6.2.3, Bahu Sham. Although I am one, I shall become many. Krishna expands himself in this material energy, and the whole cosmic manifestation again takes place. Okay, so now we go to text number 8. Bhaktim swam abhastabhya visrajami punak punah Bhutagramam imam krishnam avasam prakritir vasat. The whole cosmic order is under me. Under my will, it is automatically manifested again and again, and under my will, it is annihilated at the end. So Jeff Bezos could say the same thing. He said, the whole company Amazon is under me, under my control. It's because of my will, it is automatically manifested again, or manifested, and under my will, it is annihilated. See? He could say the same thing. He's creating it, he's maintaining it, and he can also destroy it, or wind it up. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. This material world is the manifestation of the inferior energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now that inferior energy, the material energy, is also spiritual. It's not a material thing. Although he calls it material energy, but it's inferior spiritual energy. Why is it inferior? It's not that it doesn't possess eternality. It is eternal because it's spiritual. But it's inferior because sometimes it's manifest and sometimes it's not manifest. Whereas the superior spiritual energy is always manifest, always existing. It never seems to not exist. Although the material energy, when it disappears, it's still existing. But it's in an energy state. It's in an inertial state. At the creation, the material energy is let loose as the Mahat Tattva, into which the Lord, as his first Purusha incarnation, Mahavishnu, enters. He lies within the causal ocean and breathes out innumerable universes, and into each universe the Lord again enters as Garbhodakshay Vishnu. Each universe is in that way created. He still further manifests himself as Shirodakshay Vishnu, and that Vishnu enters into everything, even into the minute atom. This fact is explained here. He enters into everything. Now, as far as the living entities are concerned, they are impregnated into the material nature. How the living entities come into material nature? They come through the eyes of Krishna. Now, it says that the sun is one eye of Krishna. So that sunlight in the material world is coming from the Brahma Jyoti. And the Brahma Jyoti is the spiritual effulgence of Krishna's body. But what is it exactly? The Brahma Jyoti is made up of infinite number of jivas, living entities, like us. We were in that Brahma Jyoti at one time. So, where is that said? This is also said in the Bhagavad Gita. It is 7th chapter, 8th verse, Bhagavad Gita. Seventh chapter, 8th verse says, Yasoham apsa kunteya. O son of Kunti, I'm the taste of water, the light of the sun and the moon. Okay, so what is this light of the sun and the moon? Let's see what it says in the purport. In the purport it says, this verse explains how the Lord is all-pervasive by his diverse material and spiritual energies. The Supreme Lord can be preliminarily perceived by his different energies, and in this way he is realized impersonally. As the demigod in the sun is a person and is perceived by his all-pervading energy, the sunshine, so the Lord, although in his eternal abode, is perceived by his all-pervading diffusive energies. The taste of water is the active principle of water. No one likes to drink seawater because the pure taste of water is mixed with salt. Attraction for water depends on the purity of the taste, and this pure taste is one of the energies of the Lord. The impersonalist perceives the presence of the Lord in water by its taste, and the personalist also glorifies the Lord for his kindly supplying tasty water to quench man's thirst. That is the way of perceiving the Supreme. Practically speaking, there is no conflict between personalism and impersonalism. One who knows God knows that the impersonal conception and personal conception are simultaneously present in everything, and that there is no contradiction. Therefore, Lord Chaitanya established this sublime doctrine, Achintya Bheda and Abheda Tattva, simultaneous oneness and difference. The light of the sun and the moon is also originally emanating from the Brahma Jyoti. There it is. The light of the sun and the moon is emanating. So the sun is one eye, and the moon is the second eye of the Lord. That's also explained in Bhagavad Gita. The light of the sun and the moon is also originally emanating from the Brahma Jyoti, which is the impersonal effulgence of the Lord. Okay. Okay, so now, go back, 9th chapter, 8th verse. So we see that Krishna expands himself in the material world as the Vishnu incarnations. And he's present, he's Mahavishnu, he's Garbhodakshay Vishnu, and Shirodakshay Vishnu. As Shirodakshay Vishnu is present in every atom of the universe. And he's also present in the heart of every living entity. And not only in the heart of the human being, but also in every one of the cells of the human body, because each cell is an individual living entity also. So, you see, the Lord is present everywhere. He enters into everything, and even into the minute atom. Okay. Now, as far as the living entities are concerned, they are impregnated into the material nature. And that's done through the eyes of Krishna, because one eye is the sun, the other eye is the moon. Both are reflecting the light of the Brahma Jyoti from the spiritual world, which is made up of infinite number of jivas. So just by glancing over the Mahat Tattva, Krishna injects the jivas into the material nature. Now, as far as living entities are concerned, they are impregnated into the material nature, and as a result of their past deeds, they take different positions. Thus, the activities of this material world begin. Yeah, as soon as the jiva is present, things start to move. Matter by itself is dead. It doesn't have the ability to organize itself. That's what we discussed last week. But because of Krishna's will and the presence of the jivas, matter begins to get organized. Okay, we'll stop there and continue after the opening of deities. Haribol. So we'll continue now in chapter 9, text number 8. Now, as far as the living entities are concerned, they are impregnated into this material nature, and as a result of their past deeds, they take different positions. Thus, the activities of this material world begin. The activities of the different species of living beings are begun from the very moment of the creation. It is not that all is evolved. The different species of life are created immediately along with the universe. Men, animals, beasts, birds, everything is simultaneously created. Because whatever desires the living entities had at the last annihilation are again manifested. It is clearly indicated here by the word of asam, that the living entities has nothing to do with this process. The state of being in their past life, in the past creation, is simply manifested again, and all this is done simply by His will, meaning Krishna's will. This is the inconceivable potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and after creating different species of life, He has no connection with them. The creation takes place to accommodate the inclinations of the various living entities, and so the Lord does not become involved with it. So that means that Darwin's theory of the evolution of species is junk. It's not true. It's just a bunch of nonsense. That everything is under the control of Krishna, and all living entities are created right away. All the different living entities are created right away, and in the beginning of creation. And then the different bodies and forms and species. And then the living entities reassume their position that they had at the end of the previous creation and annihilation, and therefore all the species have to be there so they can assume the same position they had before, and then again they start a new cycle of karma. So, what are those species? You have aquatics, you have plants, you have reptiles and worms, you have plants and mountains. Mountains are considered in the same category as plants because they're immovable, and plants are immovable. Right? So then you have the aquatics, plants and mountains, reptiles and worms, and then you have birds, and then you have what? No, they're part of the reptiles and things. And then you have the mammals, and then you have the humans. What did I miss? I missed one. Let's start again. You have aquatics, you have plants and mountains, you have reptiles. Oh, you have fish. Oh no, that's aquatics. You have reptiles and worms and things like that, and then you have birds. So now it's 4. Then you have the mammals, animals, and you have human beings. Oh, insects. I forgot insects. That's the one I forgot. Yeah. Yeah, the insects. I forgot the insects. Okay. So, these are all these species are created simultaneously in the beginning of time. And then the living entities take their positions. Okay. So now we go to text number 9. Nachamam tani karmani nibandananti dhananjaya udasina vadasinam asaktam tesu karmasu. O Dhananjaya, all this work cannot bind me. I am ever detached from all these material activities, seated as though neutral. Well, there's a verse like this also in the 3rd chapter. It says, let's see. This is something we have to understand about Krishna. He's not bound by any work because he has no work that he has to do. He can produce everything by his expansions. Therefore, he's independent always. Let's see. Okay, so this is the 3rd chapter, verse 22, which says, O son of Pritha, there's no work prescribed for me within all the 3 planetary systems, nor am I in want of anything, nor have I a need to obtain anything, and yet I am engaged in prescribed duties. So these are the unique qualities of Krishna. So in the purport it says, one should not think in this connection, that the Supreme Personality of Godhead has no engagement. In his spiritual world, he is always engaged. In the Brahma Samhita 5.6, it is stated, Atmaram masya tasyasti pakrityana samagama. He is always involved in his eternal, blissful spiritual activities. But he has nothing to do with these material activities. So Krishna is always engaged in his spiritual activities, but not in any material activities for sense gratification like we are. Material activities are being carried on by his different potencies. The Lord is always neutral in the material activities of the created world. This neutrality is mentioned here with the word udasina vat. Although he has control over every minute detail of material activities, he is sitting as if neutral. The example can be given of a high court judge sitting on his bench. By his orders, so many things are happening. Someone is being hanged, someone is being put into jail, someone is awarded a huge amount of wealth, but still he is neutral. He has nothing to do with all that gain and loss. Similarly, the Lord is always neutral, although he has his hand in every sphere of activity. In the Vedanta Sutra, it is stated, Vaishamya Nagrinye Na. He is not situated in the dualities of the material world. He is transcendental to these dualities, nor is he attached to the creation and annihilation of this material world. The living entities take their different forms in the various species of life according to their past deeds, and the Lord doesn't interfere with them. Well, in the Bible, it's very interesting. It says that God destroyed the world because he was angry at the sinfulness of living entities. And then the next time he recreated it, he said he would never destroy it again. In other words, he got angry. But that's not Krishna. That's some other God. Because Krishna is always neutral. He doesn't get angry, he doesn't get frustrated. He doesn't regret something that he did. He's neutral and he's independent. Okay, so now the next verse is the key verse to understanding gravity. It says, Maya dakshena prakriti suyate satcharacharam hitananena konte jagat viparivartate. So verse number 10. This material nature, which is one of my energies, is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, producing all moving and non-moving beings. Under its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. So now we go back to the example of Amazon. Amazon represents the energy of Jeff Bezos, and it's working under his direction. And He's producing all the moving and non-moving elements of his organization. So he has buildings; those things are non-moving, and then he has trucks and cars and airplanes and trains and different means of transportation, and he's got machines, and he's got people working. So he's producing all these moving and non-moving beings and things to get the work done for his company. So in the purport, Prabhupada says, it is clearly stated here that the Supreme Lord, although aloof from all the activities in the material world, remains the Supreme Director. Now, let's say, but Jeff Bezos is also aloof in a sense. If one of his employees driving a truck has an accident, he might get a little disturbed, but it doesn't affect him because he has insurance. And he is not personally responsible. It's the driver of the truck that's responsible. The driver of the truck made a mistake and had an accident. In the same way, Krishna is not responsible for any of the sins of the living entities. This is explained also in the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where it says, Nadate, let's see, 5th chapter, Nadate kashchichit papam nacheva sakritam vibhu agyane navritam jnana tena muyanti jantava. Nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge. So Krishna is not responsible for the sins of the living entities. The living entities themselves are responsible. Huh? 5th chapter, 15th verse. It is clearly stated here that the Supreme Lord, although aloof from all activities of the material world, remains the Supreme Director. The Supreme Lord is the supreme will and the background of this material manifestation, but the management is being conducted by the material nature. Well, when it talks about material nature, it's talking about the demigods. Krishna also states in Bhagavad Gita that of all of the living entities in different forms and species, I am the Father. Aham bija pradapita, he says. That's 14th chapter. The Father gives seeds to the womb of the mother for the child. And similarly, the Supreme Lord, by his mere glance, see, that's the whole point, his mere glance, injects all living entities into the womb of material nature, and they come out in their different forms and species according to their last desires and activities, or karma. All these living entities, although born under the glance of the Supreme Lord, take their different bodies according to their past deeds and desires. So the Lord is not directly attached to this material creation. He simply glances over material nature. Material nature is thus activated. And everything is created immediately. Again, he's repeating, everything is created immediately. All living entities, bodies, and so forth. Because he glances over material nature, there's undoubtedly activity on the part of the Supreme Lord, but he has nothing to do with the manifestation of the material world directly. This example is given in the Smriti, and that means in Srimad Bhagavatam and other supplementary Vedic literatures. When there is a fragrant flower before someone, the fragrance is touched by the smelling power of the person. Yet, the smelling and the flower are detached from one another. There is a similar connection between the material world and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Actually, it has nothing to do with this material world, but he creates by his glance and ordains, or orders. In summary, material nature, without the superintendence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, cannot do anything. Yet the Supreme Personality is detached from all material activities. Okay, so this law of gravity. Now we studied this before, but I want to go over it again. This time we're giving more information than before about how it works. Prabhupada says in Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th canto, 23rd chapter, 3rd verse. According to the description of this verse, the hundreds and thousands of stars and the great planets such as the Sun, the Moon, Venus, Mercury, Mars, and Jupiter are not clustered together because of the law of gravity or any similar idea of the modern scientists. These planets and stars are all servants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Govinda, or Krishna, and according to his order they sit in their chariots and travel in their respective orbits. So now we have a perfect correspondence to an airline company like Delta Airlines or Jeff Bezos and his airplanes for delivering his packages. An airplane stays in a specific trajectory and is piloted by a human being. So, in the same way, the planets are flying machines, and they're piloted by individual personalities like Bhumi Devi, who's in charge of the Earth. So she's the pilot, driving the Earth machine through space. Now, how is it held up in space? That we've discussed. We're going to discuss even more. So another sample Prabhupada gives is in this 5:23:3. He says, when bulls are yoked together and tied to a central post to thresh rice, they tread around that pivot without deviating from their proper positions. One bull being closest to the post, another in the middle, and a third on the outside. Similarly, all the planets and all hundreds and thousands of stars revolve around the pole stars, the planet of Maharaj Dhruva, in their respective orbits, some higher and some lower, fastened by the Supreme Personality of Godhead to the machines of material nature according to the results of their fruitive activities. They are driven around the pole star by the wind and will continue to be so until the end of creation. These planets float in the air within the vast sky, just as clouds with hundreds of tons of water float in the air or in the great sky, or in the great Siena, or as the great Siena eagles, due to the results of past activities, fly high in the sky and have no chance of falling to the ground. So he's comparing to these gigantic eagles and clouds are floating in the air, and so are the planets. And they're all floating around the pole star in fixed orbits. Every planet has a driver. It's a demigod who's in charge of that planet. The orbits in which they move are compared to machines given by material nature to the operating deities of the stars and planets, who carry out the orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead by revolving around Dhruvaloka. So, yes, there's a verse, Ishvara Sarvabhutanam Hirdeshe Rujunatistati Brahmayan Sarvabhutani Yanturudani Maya. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of material energy. So our machine is the body. And the demigod's machine is the Earth planet, or Mars, or Jupiter, or the Sun. The machine given by material nature, whether the machine of the body or the machine of the orbit or Kala Chakra, works according to the orders given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead and material nature work together to maintain the great universe, and not only this universe, but also the millions of other universes beyond this one. The question of how the planets and stars are floating is also answered in this verse. It is not because of the laws of gravity. Rather, the planets and stars are enabled to float by manipulations of the air. It is due to such manipulations that big heavy clouds float and big eagles fly in the sky. Modern airplanes like the 747 jet aircraft work in a similar way by controlling the air. They float high in the sky, resisting the tendency to fall to earth. Such adjustments of the air are all made possible by the cooperation of the principles of Purusha, male, and Prakriti, female, by cooperation of material nature, which is considered to be Prakriti, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is considered the Purusha. All the affairs of the universe are going on nicely, in their proper order. Prakriti, material nature, is also described in the Brahma Samhita as follows. Okay, so here's the explanation. That's why your homework is to study what is space wind for tomorrow. Space wind. And you read Srimad Bhagavatam 5.23.3. And so the Supreme Personality of Godhead and material nature work together to maintain the great universe, and not only this universe, but also the millions. Okay, so we just read that. So next he quotes from Brahma Samhita, Srishti Stiti Pralaya Sadhana Saktireka Chayeva Yasha Bhuvanani Vibharti Durga Ichana Rupam Apiyasha Chichestatesa Govinda Mari Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. The external potency, Maya, who is the nature of the shadow of the Chit, spiritual potency, is worshipped by all people as Durga, the creating, preserving, and destroying agency of this mundane world. I adore the primeval Lord Govinda, in accordance with whose will Durga conducts herself. Prabhupada explains, material nature, the external energy of the Supreme Lord, is also known as Durga, or the female energy that protects the great fort of this universe. The word Durga also means fort. This universe is just like a great fort in which all the conditioned souls are kept, and they cannot leave it unless they are liberated by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord himself declares, Janma karma chame divyam ivam yo veti tattvata. Tyakvadeham punar janma naiti mameti sarjana. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Thus, simply by Krishna consciousness, by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can be liberated, or in other words, one can be released from the great fort of the universe and go outside it to the spiritual world. Jai Shri Shri Radha Nila Madhava Ki Jai. So, there are living entities appointed by Krishna for each planet to be the director of that planet and to direct the movement of that planet in specific orbits. So only the predominating deity of the sun, Surya Narayana, is an incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Maharaj Dhruva, the predominating deity of Dhruva is also a living entity. So Krishna himself assumes the form of Surya Narayana because the sun is the most important moving planet in the universe because it's supplying all the energy. And that energy is the effulgence of Krishna's body that's being reflected off the sun. And that effulgence is made up of innumerable jivas like us. Thus, there are two kinds of entities: the supreme entity, the personality of Godhead, and the ordinary living entity, the jiva. All the demigods are engaged in the service of the Lord, and only by such an arrangement are the affairs of the universe going on. So, you see, this makes perfect sense. All right, somebody's calling me. I have to take this phone call. Haribol, Prabhu, Hare Krishna. Yeah, all glories to Prabhupada. Yeah, I'm giving a class. No, I'm okay. I'm giving a class right now. Well, now, be real quick. Be real quick. Go ahead. What is it? What is it? Go ahead. If you call in a half an hour, I'm free. Okay. Haribol. Haribol. Regarding, okay, so next he's going to talk about these big eagles that can pick up elephants. So he's giving the example of the eagles. He's giving an example of the planets and the sun. What? Yeah, he already gave the clouds previously. Yeah. So this is an explanation of what is the law of gravity. It's not the same thing that the scientists say it is, right? So this week's homework was, today's homework was to find out what the scientist's concept of gravity is. And now, based on what we discussed, you can explain, the second homework is explain what is the Bhagavatam's explanation of the law of gravity. Now, you've already done this homework before, but we're going over it again because it's important. Because in order to defeat the explanations of the scientists and the evolutionists and the Darwinists and all these people, and it's important to have a clear understanding of the Krishna consciousness point of view. And that understanding is a personal understanding, whereas the scientist's understanding is impersonal. And there are many examples in this world that are comparable to what's happening in the universe. One example was any organized business is comparable to what's happening in the universe. Krishna, we're only imitating what Krishna is doing and has done. You understand? And everything is intelligence driven. There's nothing that happens out of accident, by accident. Everything is intelligence driven. And the supreme intelligence is Krishna. And when there are, let's say, mishaps, like hurricanes and coronavirus and this thing and that thing, it's being controlled by Krishna. It's not happening by accident. And it's happening as a reaction to pious or sinful activity. And that's what's going on in the material world. There's piety and there's sinfulness. And there are reactions to it. For every action, there's an equal and commensurate reaction. Just like the law of sense gratification says, as soon as you engage in sense gratification, it's going to be followed by misery. It's a law. of nature. And therefore, pious and impious activities receive reactions that keep people entangled in the laws of material nature. Therefore, there's two major points. One is equality, and the other is neutrality. Now, we discussed this before, but you see, today we heard how Krishna is actually neutral. He's not affected by what's happening in the material world because it's the living entities that are causing these things as being under the control of the modes of material nature. So that's explained in Bhagavad Gita 5.15. So the third homework is to read that purport and explain the phrase man proposes, God disposes. And these are all things that you've done before, but we're going over it again because they're very important points that we should understand. Okay, so we'll stop right there. You have homework for tomorrow. And I'm going to read, I already read Shrestha's homework, but I'm going to read anybody else. I think I have Advitya and Agastya's homework. They sent me by email. So if you can send me by email or text your homework, I'll read it also. And I'll give you back your homework Sunday. Hare Krishna. Glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.